This is the next in the series of lessons on time. We started out several weeks ago talking about human standard time and God's sovereign time. According to human standard time, God is often late. According to God's sovereign time, He's always on time. I've been fascinating with time all my life. I remember the first watch I ever owned. Mother and Daddy bought it for me for Christmas in the 6th grade. It was a Prep watch. That was a brand. Never saw one before, never saw one since then. But it was up until the electronic watches that we have now that set themselves with Fort Collins, Colorado, the National Time Service. It was the most accurate watch I ever had. It was so accurate. I was in the 6th grade. At 7 seconds until time for the bell to ring, I would get up and start walking toward the door, and by the time the teacher said, "Jerry, sit down," about that time the bell would ring. I had more fun with that. I was just fascinated by that. People are concerned with time. Someone gave this statistic: the annual cost of running red lights and medical bills and car repairs is $7 billion a year. The average time saved by running a red light is 50 seconds. And so we spend a lot of money trying to save time. Some things can't be hurried. Somebody put a graffiti on a wall. Michelangelo could have made better time with a paint roller. But sometimes it's the quality that makes the time worth it. Whatever change we make, we're exchanging the minutes and hours and days of our life for our choice. We must ask, what accomplishment is worth swapping my life for? What we're going to do in this lesson is look at Moses. Moses is one of those great heroes that's mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Moses was ready to go to work for God when he was 40 years old. That summary is given to us in Acts chapter 7. We begin reading in verse 17. Stephen is recounting Israel's history. But when the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt, till another king arose who did not know Joseph. This man dealt treacherously with our people and oppressed our forefathers, making them expose their babies so that they might not live. At this time Moses was born and was well pleasing to God, and he was brought up in his father's house for 3 months. But when he was set out, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deed. Now, when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Egypt. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended and avenged him who was oppressed and struck down the Egyptian, for he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand. And so Moses, at 40 years old, was ready to go to work for God. The next day he appeared to 2 of them as they were fighting and tried to reconcile them, saying, "Men, your brethren, why do you wrong one another?" But he who did his neighbor wrong pushed him away, saying, "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you did the Egyptian yesterday?" Then at this saying Moses fled and became a dweller in the land of Midian, where he had 2 sons. So at 40 years old, Moses rushed ahead. He supposed that everybody would have understood that he was to be the leader of God's people. But it wasn't time. Moses was ready, but God wasn't. Verse 30, then when 40 years had passed, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame and a fire in the bush in the wilderness of Mount Sinai. Well, you would think when God approaches him this time, Moses would say, "Well, that's wonderful. I've been ready for 40 years. I'm glad you finally got around to it." However, that was not the case. God was on the same schedule that he had discussed with Abraham and Isaac. We talked about Abraham a few weeks ago. We talked about Abraham, God, and long-range planning. God talked to Abraham about blessings that would come as a result of his working with God 400 years later. He said, in 400 years, I'll bring your people down into Egypt, and then I'll bring them back, and they will inherit this land. He repeated that promise to Isaac. When God was ready, Moses wasn't. When Moses was ready, God wasn't. It's hard to get God's time and man's time aligned. Now, we're supposed to learn something from this. Romans 15, verse 4, whatever things happened before were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the Scripture, might have hope. We're to learn something from that. And we want to look today at Moses and timing. How do I set my watch with God's watch? How do I set my time with God's time? Moses was sometimes ahead of God. Moses was sometimes behind God. Moses was, in the last part of his life, with God. God's time is right, and so Moses can help me to understand how to set my clock with God's clock. So we get to Moses, 80 years old. 40 years before, he was ready to work with God. Now he isn't. Notice what happened. The Lord appeared to him in a burning bush. A bush was burning but was not consumed. He said to him, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I've surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrow. So I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come to me, and I've also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come now therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. How's Moses going to respond? Again, he didn't say, well, I'm glad you finally came to that conclusion. He said, Moses said to God, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Earlier he had said, I'm the leader, 40 years earlier, but now he said, who am I? I'm not sure I'm the right person. God replied by saying, I will certainly be with you. Moses, I don't expect you to do this by yourself, but I'm going to be with you. Moses then had a second objection. He said, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to you? He said, God, how am I going to do this? I don't even know your name. And God said to Moses, I am who I am. Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Moreover, God said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is my memorial in all generations. So God's answering him. Who am I? I'll be with you. Don't worry. I'll take care of it. But I don't even know your name. Tell them that I am has sent you. And then Moses has another objection. Chapter 4 and verse 1. He said, but suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say the Lord has not appeared to you. He said, well, they don't believe me. And the Lord said, what is that in your hand? He said, a rod. Cast it down. It became a serpent. Pick it up. It turned into a rod again. Put your hand into your bosom. It was leprous. Put it back in. It was well. And then Moses said, God, there's just something that I really didn't want to talk about, but I need you to know this. I'm not eloquent, neither before nor since have you spoken to your servant, for I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. I've got a speech impediment. So the Lord said to him, who made man's mouth, or who made the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now go, and I'll be with your mouth and teach you what to say. God finally said, Moses, you're the man, and it's the time, and it's time to go. Setting the clock is difficult. When Moses was 40 years old, he had enthusiasm, assertiveness, and commitment, but God wasn't ready. When Moses was 80, God was ready, but Moses was hesitant and afraid. And so the question is, am I willing to fit into God's schedule, or am I like Moses, many times running ahead of God, many times running behind God? How can we get coordinated? Here's some questions that came to my mind as I thought about Moses. Will I wait 40 years for my prayers to be answered? Will I trust God to keep His promises for 400 years? Since I live with fast computers, cellular phones, fax machine, and email, will I require God to speed up if He's going to work with me? Will God have to do better with me than He did with Moses to deserve my faith? Since cars, airplanes, space shuttles, and Pentium chips are faster today, does God work faster or slower than He did with Abraham and Moses? Should I try to fit into God's schedule, or should I expect God to fit into mine? That's what we're talking about as we look at these lessons on time. Moses cooperated with God. He led the people out of Egypt. And when we get to Exodus chapter 20, we find God giving to them the 10 commandments. He makes that covenant with the people of Israel. And then in Exodus 24, God asked Moses to come up to the mountain to receive the official copy. He had given him the commandments in chapter 20. So, Exodus 24, 13 and 14. Moses arose with his descendant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God, and he said to the elders, wait here for us until we come back. Indeed, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man has a difficulty, let them go to them. Verse 18, so Moses went into the midst of the cloud and went up into the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Meanwhile, back in the camp, Exodus chapter 32. Listen to the time issue here. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, come, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And Aaron said to them, break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people broke off the golden earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a molded calf. Then they said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. So when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. Then they rose early on the next day, offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And the Lord said to Moses, Go, get down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded calf and worshipped it and sacrificed it to them. This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, that I may consume them, and I will make you a great nation. Moses pleaded with the Lord his God and said, Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak and say, He brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath and relent from this harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of I give to your descendants, so they shall inherit it forever. So the Lord relented from the harm which he said he would do to his people. Time is a great issue. Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. That's a long time without the leader. And so they became impatient. It says Moses delayed. Moses really was just doing what God told him to do. He was on God's schedule, but the people got impatient. Generally speaking, folks like a quick fix. I want it, and I want it now. And it is amazing how much money and effort we spend in trying to get things quickly. I want to be gratified in a hurry. And so they said, if Moses can't do it, we'll do it ourselves. And so they got into making the golden calf and worshiping it. God wanted to destroy the people, but Moses talked with him and said, what is this going to do to your influence? And so God relented. Wasn't Moses nice trying to talk God down? But now let's continue. Verse 15 of Exodus 32. And Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tables of the testimony were in his hand. The tablets were written on both sides. On the one side and the other they were written. Now the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there's a sound of war in the camp. But he said, it is not the noise of the shout of victory, nor the noise of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear. So it was, as soon as he came near the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing. So Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hand and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Moses, who had been telling God, you need to be patient with these people. You don't want to destroy them. What are the people going to say? But when he saw what was going on, he is ready to reprimand them. And someone said Moses may have been the only person in the history of the world that broke all 10 commandments the same day. He destroyed the copy of the commandment which God had made. And then, verse 20, he took the calf which they had made, burned it in the fire, and ground it to powder, and he scattered it on the water and made the children of Israel to drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought so great a sin upon them? So Aaron said, do not let the anger of my Lord become heavy. You know the people. They're set on evil, for they said, make us gods that should go before us. As for this Moses, a man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we did not know what has become of him. And I said to them, who has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, and I cast it in the fire, and this calf came out. One of the first problems that man ever had, first of all, broke God's will. broke his commandment in the Garden of Eden. And then when God confronted Adam and Eve, what did they do? Instead of saying, you know what, you're right, we messed up, they said, it wasn't my fault. Adam said, it's a woman that you gave. God, really, it's your fault. If you hadn't given me this woman, we'd be in good shape. And he asked Eve, what about, well, the devil made me do it. Both of them were not willing to own the responsibility for making wrong choices. And so when Moses comes down and confronts his brother Aaron, what happened? Well, you know the people, you know how they are. Wasn't really my fault. They got this gold, and I just pitched the gold in the fire, and this calf jumped out. Well, that's pretty far-fetched. You just don't have gold jumping out of a fire like that. Verse 25. Now when Moses saw that the people were unrestrained, for Aaron had not restrained them to their shame among their enemies, then Moses stood in the entrance of the camp and said, whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. Then he said to them, thus says the Lord God of Israel, let every man put his sword on his side and go in and out from the entrance to entrance throughout the camp, and let every man kill his brother, every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. So the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. Then Moses said, consecrate yourselves today to the Lord, that he may bestow on you a blessing this day, for every man has opposed his son and his brother. And it came to pass on the next day that Moses said to the people, you have committed a great sin. So now I will go up to the Lord, perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, oh, these people have committed a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, I pray, blot me out of your book which you have written. And the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. Now therefore go and lead the people to the place of which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit for punishment, I will visit punishment upon them for their sins. So the Lord plagued the people because of what they did with the calf which Aaron made. What time is it? What time is it? God's sovereign time is better than human standard time. Hebrews chapter 11, 28 to 30. By faith he kept the Passover, speaking of Moses, and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as if by dry ground, whereas the Egyptians attempted to do so were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. The people of Israel eventually came into the promised land. However, Moses never entered because he failed to glorify and honor God. And this is something that's interesting. Both Abraham and Moses failed to see all the benefits of their faithfulness to God. They made their decisions and they obeyed God, and as a result of their cooperating with God and eventually fitting into God's schedule and doing what God wanted them to do, they not only were recognized themselves, but they also blessed people for generations and generations to come. And what I'm learning from this study is that in using my time, I don't need to do just what will gratify me at the present time, but how will this affect my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and people for 100 and 200 years later. When I make decisions like that on how I'm going to use my time and live my life, it'll make a lot of difference. It'll be a big contrast between that and doing whatever feels good right now. Moses and Abraham and Jesus and others teach us to wait for God. Notice how Jesus decided how he would invest his time and how he would contrast comfort and pain and what he needed to do at the specific time. We've been reading in Hebrews chapter 11. Let's go to chapter 12. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. Jesus did not go to the cross because he enjoyed the cross. Jesus went to the cross because of the joy that was set before him. He saw something out in the distant future that was worth suffering pain for at the present time. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. But later he was rewarded for it. He is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. And the writer of the Hebrews said, think about it, consider him. Consider him who endured such hostility of sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your soul. Time often brings discouragement and weariness because we're not seeing the good that comes from doing what we need to be doing. Many times I need to look into the future, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, 200 years, to see the benefits of doing what God wants me to do. I need to wait when God says wait, and I need to move when God says move. How are you doing with your clock and God's clock? I've talked to many people who said, I know I need to obey the gospel. I believe in Jesus, have no doubt about that. I'd be willing to turn from my sin, but I don't know if I'm ready right now. When should I do that? 2 Corinthians 6 verse 2, God's answer is, behold, now is the day of salvation. God's word is always today when we know what we need to do. That's God's clock. And so if you've never obeyed the gospel of Christ, let me encourage you. Contact someone. My phone number is 615-584-0512. Give me a call. Be glad to talk with you and study or assist you in obeying the gospel. If you have some personal concern, feel free to contact me and we'll talk about what you need to do. But the important thing to do is to do what God says do, the way God says do it, when God says do it, and God's way is today. May God bless us as we try to set our clock with God's clock.